Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the last video in this series about assessment and about how you might try some new things in your classes. And it's going to be a continuation of our discussion of the proficiency scale and then applying that to your classroom situation and taking traditional marks and converting it to the proficiency scale so that you can enter it into your MyEd. So I'm going to share the screen with you in a second here. I just want to make sure my MyEd is ready to roll because I need to be able to share it with you. Okay, it is. And we are going to talk about the process to potentially even, and I think some of us in this building could get there. Maybe not in the academic courses, because as an academic teacher, I find this a struggle to try and get to gradeless. But again, I think in really project-oriented classes, the potential for gradeless is really there. In the shops, in the arts, in foods potentially, in various other classes. And part of the process might be just one or two projects in your class. You just go gradeless. You just go descriptive feedback and use the proficiency scales and don't give a number. But that's all up to you. And as I've been trying to emphasize in these chats, the curriculum is really fluid. It's flexible. You might decide to use something in one situation, but not in another. You might get a really workable class, a malleable class that you can, enthusiastically apply some of these techniques to, and they would like that. Whereas if you have other classes that are more restricting because of student ability or because of topic, it might not work. But each journey takes a single step to start. So I would just try and find your favorite project, your favorite class, your favorite book, your favorite whatever, and look at it and go, how can I make this even a little better than it already is? So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we'll take a crack at this. And again, I'm available if anybody wants to chat about it or come out to the portable and talk about. There's Rusty. Ready for another session, Rusty? Smartest dog in the world. Not. Actual total pain in the backside. Okay, so let's start off with the assessment framework document and the proficiency scale. So the idea that the kid is either emerging, developing, proficient, or extending, and that you are creating assignments and opportunities for them to show this by interpreting the curriculum and building curricular competency assignments through the content. And then, of course, having this whole process self-evaluated or self-assessed through the core competencies. And it is really a loop that you need to always keep in mind when you're working on new things. So in this process, we're going to look at how we convert our A's, B's, C pluses, C's, C minuses, and F's into the extending, proficient, developing, emerging, or insufficient. And you see here, this is a graphic, a color graphic. I think it's from the Yukon. Or actually, it's from another school district. There it is, Langley, bottom right, Langley. And you see how they are encouraging this process. That extending is basically the 86 to 100 student. The proficient is the 73 to 85 student. The developing is the C minus to C plus student. Even emerging, you have those kids who work really hard in your class but still only get 55%. They might be the emerging crowd. And then if some student doesn't do anything, doesn't hand anything, it's very hard to, from the evidence, know what they know. They don't know anything as far as you know. So that's obviously a fail. So how does this look in a MyEd situation? Let me show you. oops, where are we here? Go back to here. So this is my law class from first quarter, and I use the 4-point scale now as a mark as well. This is my law class, and everything is out of 4. But you'll notice here, some are 3.5, 2.5, 3.25, and people like Tom Schimmer and others would probably have a coronary if they saw that, because they believe in the idea that it's either extending, meeting, developing, or emerging, and it has to be one of those 4 things. And until I see that actually in the reporting order, I don't think I'm going to go there, because the kids get this too. I can convert the mark into something out of 4. For example, a big part of my course is the charter exam, right? I do all this charter work, charter translation, charter vocab, all this stuff, and I explained that in the previous video. Well, I give them an exam. It's out of 75. So when I mark the exam, I take the number out of 75 and I convert it to something out of 4. That's why you get these marks. This student got 3.9 out of 4, which means she got probably 73 or 72 out of 75. Other kids got 1.4, 1.3. They didn't do as well. And so you convert that way. But here's another cool thing that you can do right now, and that is in your marks score category here, you can just choose standards. And the standards are 1 to 4. You can create and convert. And so I didn't do that, but you can going forward. And I may do this with my history class. But so now for a particular student, if I try to type in a 5, it won't let me. It's not within the rating scale, right? But if I put in 3.5, it lets me. And it even color codes it, and the color coding is part of this process in MyEd, which allows you to analyze your class. Once all your marks are in, you can look at the color coding to see which kids got it and which kids didn't. It's kind of a summative look at your whole class, but that's another topic for another day. The point is, if you move to a scale system, you can convert the mark to a mark. You could convert the emerging to a 55. You can convert the proficient to a 73 if you want. And what's that based on? It's based on the evidence that you are collecting in the process of teaching. This system as well here, again, I've beaten this one a few times. You see the Yukon is encouraging this, right? 86 is an A, mostly exceeding. These are the BC, these are the Yukon. I like the word mostly, because the BC one, exceeding, is almost too definitive to me. I like mostly. I like a little bit of leeway so that I can give a kid a 3.75 out of 4. This is really, really good. You've hit all these things in the criteria, but there's a problem. And again, some other documents I'll show you here. This is a handy one. This is from the assessment people in BC. Not yet meeting, approaching, meeting, exceeding. And the words are kind of changing in different documents, but they basically mean the same thing. Here's the mark at the bottom. The A student demonstrates excellent, outstanding performance in relation to expected learning outcomes for subject and grade. The C student, the student demonstrates satisfactory performance in relation to expected learning outcomes for subject and grade. And on we go. So there's some tips in here, and this is in your documents in this email. Tips for using this in MyEd. And here's an example of a presentation rubric that I use with students. And when I do the presentation process in my class, I go into some detail about what a good presentation is, because it's a big part of my program. So, here's the exceptional, exceeding kid, here's the accomplished, the meeting, here's the developing, here's the beginning. So these are just words that all mean the same thing. Exceeding, right? Proficient, meeting, developing, emerging. And you could talk about it with kids in this way. Part of the tricky part is to develop these rubrics. And I have shared in other areas a handout on rubrics, and there's a big section in the folder, the new curriculum folder on rubrics. After a while, you're not going to have too many rubrics. That's the other thing. You know, if you're in an area of school where you're doing a lot of project work, you might only have 1 or 2 rubrics. This is the rubric for this project. And you can get student input, as I showed you in the previous video, if you want to tweak it or co-create it and go from there. So I don't think there's, you know, a lot of, this is how this looks in my Law 12 class when the marks come down. You see it's out of 4 and some kids get 0. In the end, I have to stick a 0 in. I'm not totally on side with the AFL, and you as the professional are going to choose what makes the most sense for you in your particular situation. And the reason I'm advocating a lot of this is because I think it's going to make life easier for the classroom teacher. It's going to make your engagement level go up with students. And I think it's a happier process in the end. Kids know and kids understand value. And when you explain the rubrics to them and using the proficiency scale, believe me, they will catch on quickly. All right, now let's talk about Shannon Schinkel. Now, this is a tough one. Shannon is pretty amazing. She is gone to basically a gradeless program in Prince George, and I attended a couple of her workshops last summer, and she shared this with us and said we could share it with others. So I'm just going to click on a couple things here to bring to your eyes about going gradeless. And one thing I want to refer to again, sorry to go back here, is to go back to the curriculum. I want to keep this in mind because Shannon asks us to think about that as well as I lead you through her PowerPoint or parts of it. So this is Shannon here. She's probably presenting at Spring Fling. She's working on a book. And she models herself after Miss Frizzle, and don't we all, hopefully? Take some chances, make mistakes, get messy. As I've said in a previous video, I think, or to others at maybe the Dylan William, one of the key adages, aphorisms I learned at teacher training was, you're not teaching if you're not taking a risk. And I think that's part of it. It's kind of exciting. Try something new. The kids will like it. So Shannon did a lot of self exploration, right? Asking herself about the number. Was the number a fair process to get a kid a mark? Are kids learning, or are they chasing grades? Are we letting a computer algorithm dictate letter grades? Are we confusing quantity of information with rigor? And she goes through a step-by-step process of getting to this point where this is her summary, right? No letter grades or marks on any student work. Individual, balanced, descriptive feedback. Evidence of learning gathered in multiple ways. Observations, products, conversations. Give kids a roadmap of where to go next for teacher and student. Communicate progress to all stakeholders. Skills, curricular competencies are tracked using a learning scale. She doesn't even use her old grade book. Curricular competencies are front and center. Test-free zone, show me what you can do. Voice choice, project-based opportunities instead of tests. No zeros or late marks. Students get any and every opportunity to change an assessment. So this is pretty out there stuff. Obviously, even some of the stuff a guy like me can't quite accept yet. But I like thinking about it because you could see in a certain classroom situations, you might be able to try some of this stuff. And some of the propaganda in here is definitely you know, talking about how hard it is on kids. I mean, why do so many kids get to our level and they just hate school and they hate learning or trying to learn, and they've been beaten down for years because their marks are low. And there's a different way Shannon is advocating, and it's to try to build kids up by getting rid of marks and going more descriptive and building strong lessons through the curricular competencies process. So I'll show you a little bit of that when she talks about, you know, her socials 8 class. Why go gradeless? Motivation. When grades are front and center and dangled in front of students, they tend to motivate students to go after the grade, but not the learning. Why is 86 better than 84? Even with descriptive feedback, in addition to grades, it's difficult to motivate students. So motivation is a big thing in this process. Advocating going gradeless, individualized, thoughtful, challenging opportunities for growth, more optimistic, never ending, promises success for all. In a gradeless classroom, learning is continuous for all. It's the student's individual learning journey. So it feeds into a lot of the inclusion, it feeds into the differentiated learning, and it feeds into, again, I think a feedback loop where the student, the teacher, and peers are potentially commenting on, supporting each other's learning. So again, not easy to do, but something to think about in certain situations when you want to try something that you think might be effective. When does learning occur? It happens when we provide feedback and students make changes. Then students are giving another opportunity to see if it sticks. When we put a mark on the page without feedback, they don't know what they've done right or wrong. So give feedback and give students time to apply the feedback. And I do this in some classes. I give a mark and I'll say to a student, you have a week to rehand that in, and I'll remark it with the fixes. And there are lots of other opportunities here to look at what she does. She uses grows and glows a lot with students. There's the learning scales that she's talked about. Prince George has a 5-point scale for some reason, and I prefer just the 4.1 that we are using in the BC curriculum. And she talks about the curricular competencies and how to build out of them appropriate assignments. And one thing she talks about is creating higher level thinking skills. And this is going to be a future topic, critical thinking skills and the provincial assessments. And of course, most of us has to start here with kids and then get them to get to the higher levels by creating appropriate assignments. But one thing a lot of these clinicians like Shelley Moore and others suggest we think about is that we have to presume competence. A lot of the kids we are dealing with are coming into your class already able to do a lot of the curricular competencies. They are. The thing that you might be teaching them new is the content. And so it's to draw out those competencies that they're probably already decent at in some classes and applying it to new content. So the house of curricular competency, you can't assess the house until you have the house. So building the content foundation, the competency, the curricular, and seeing how you can assess it. So scaffolded instruction, going from the bottom of blooms to the top. And I have to do this for sure in my history class, in my senior classes. I need to find out where kids are at, what do they know, and then take them to a higher place, get them to thinking higher, right? Gradients of cognitive complexity. Obviously, the kid doing extending work is going to be cognitively further ahead than the emerging kid, generally, unless the emerging kid is just plain lazy or disinterested and doesn't try. So again, different proficiency scales, that she's using. And I want to get down to where she's focusing on, there's Shelley Moore, if anybody wants to watch Napoleon Schmamolian, the aha moment, students cheating, and then I can. I like her approach here, using the I can statement and the single point rubric, which I've shown you already, and taking the curricular competency and inserting it into the document as a competency, a target, and then creating an assignment using the content to build this process. And then evaluating it. Student evaluates, you evaluate, and you see where you get. Now, let me just go back, for example, to the curriculum. So here's grade 8 social studies that she's referencing in that particular handout. Think of if you put the words I can, and then you take that, you could copy that into a document. I can compare the advantages and disadvantages of various graphic forms of communication. So that could be a particular assignment you're working on one day where you Look at graphic forms of communication. It could be in a textbook. It could be something on the screen that you put up, and you ask kids a hinge question or a big question, and then they have to interpret that. And you could take this and, oops, sorry, copy that. And if you go down to your single point rubric, you put this into the rubric and then look at a mark. If you make this a significant assignment or just a process, produce that for the kids, give them a couple. You could attach this to a handout with graphics on it and create a useful assignment that you could use over and over again. You could put the second piece of criteria into this rubric as well if you wanted to. I can demonstrate an ability to interpret scales, etc. And you could make this whole rubric about using social studies inquiries processes by handing in, that's the finished product, by handing in or creating this pie chart process. And if you want to make it red, like I like to, red for Fred, then it pops out of the chart. You can hand this out to students so they have it, and then you give them examples to work on. Find graphs, tables, maps for them to work on to show that they have mastered this particular competency. And then if you go back to the scale, you could say, based on a series of questions you might ask them or a project you give them, did they meet these? Did they demonstrate, right? One thing, again, if you put the words I can in front, I can, did the student then demonstrate this in the process that you created by creating an assignment for them? And in the content section of Social Studies 8, there's a ton of really awesome topics that you could go to. Most of us are going to be using textbooks in the academic side of things, but for sure in the project side, the project courses, or I would say the sort of arts shops and other areas, you could definitely be focusing on the curricular competencies in your curriculum. And again, let's just do that. If we go to, say, an arts and design technology class, this is grade 10. Let's go to Culinary Arts 10 on the web. And again, there's the core competencies, the big ideas, diner needs and taste informed culinary service. Here are the elaborations and the curricular competency. Can the student do this? I can identify the clientele for students, type of service for a buffet, right? Can you identify the clientele for a buffet? Defining. I can identify tasks involved in completing a recipe or service. Prioritizing. And I can consider what has to happen first and what needs to be done before going on to the next steps in order to complete a recipe or service. And again, the teacher can take these, slip them into the single point rubric, and create an assignment around whether the student is able to overall identify clientele and implement a menu, food processing, creating food for that particular client. And the content here could tie into the assignment, and the process is underway. And I don't think you have to do this too many times to get the hang of it. The question is always going to come down to, do you have the inclination, I would say even courage, because I don't at this point. This is an example. I would struggle with this. This is an example of her as a student did a work on the Black Plague in Social Studies 8. They did some excellent drawings and talked about the plague and this process. And there's a poem in English 8, I believe, that a child wrote and then illustrated. And you don't have to give a mark for this. You can give descriptive feedback going, holy cow, that is super extending. Very good work. Thank you for sharing your creativity, and on you go. And as I walk around the school, I see so many awesome projects that kids have done and are doing So that this possibility of converting traditional grades into standard-based grades and even going that extra step to gradeless is possible if you want to, I think, elevate engagement levels in your class, bring traditional systems in to a certain extent, but also tweak them in a way that allows students to have more input, both in self-evaluation, peer assessment, and the core competencies analysis. So I'll leave you with that. That's a lot to digest and think about. I've included a little video from Dr. Seuss there, not Dr. Seuss, they're using Dr. Seuss to talk about the gradeless process. And yeah, thanks very much. The next topic after spring break, and I only have a bit of time. Once I start teaching again in April, I probably won't be able to produce as many of these. I'm going to take a look at critical thinking, and I'm going to do the name game with you in a separate video, which is how I start every semester since 1987 when I started teaching every class. It's the best way to start a class. If you want to see it, stick around and look for that in a future video. Anyway, thanks very much. And that's the end of my video. So let me click out of here. Have a great spring break, everyone. If you were watching this before spring break, take care. Have a great time. Stay healthy, and see you after spring break. Thanks very much.